Hope you are doing well. So this is our first question of GMAT practice question paper. Okay, now let me point out what is the directions which is pointed here. The direction says that the following questions consist of sentences that are either partly or entirely underlined. We need to select the answer choice that represents the best revision of the underlined text. So choice are duplicates the original version, choice A, which you would find out. So that would be your means duplicates the original version. If the original seems better than any of the revisions, then select it. Okay. So as far as we know that uh, in GMAT, generally we meet five options, right? Some of the other top-notch exams also uh, take five of the options. Fine. Let's look into it. That as for the direction, we need to read the sentence and we need to find out the part of the sentence which is underlined, and we need to replace that. If we find out uh, all these five of the options, and out of them, the first option is always same, right? And all the other options are somehow correctly mentioned one, or maybe means edify, or maybe you can say that they are incorrect in nature. So what is the sentence point out here? The statement stated the phrase going back to 1976, almost a half century ago, suggests that IOWAGOP caucuses have been held regularly every year. So the question is given, how can this be corrected? It means the underlined or black or bold letter part of the sentence uh, is incorrect or maybe correct, right? So we need to find out from out of this from this five of the options, right? And we need to choose which of the option will be the appropriate one to replace it, or will it be remain same. Fine. So the statement, as far as it is pointed, the phrase going back to 1976, almost a half century ago. Right. The comma is also given. So please do remember there is an error of punctuation marks also. And the question type would be anything. Right. So our error could be anything. So suggest that the IOWGOP caucuses have been held regularly every year. Now, if I look into this particular sentence, so I could say that, or I could sense that this is a kind of a misplaced modifier question. The original sentence implies that what? You can say IOWGOP caucuses have been held regularly every year since 1976, which is not the intended meaning. The phrase, you can say, going back to 1976, almost a half century ago, indicated. It is a modifier that should be correctly placed to convey the intended meaning, isn't it? Let's look into the option, which of the option will be replacing to it. So we can consider that uh, the first statement, which is fixed, going back to 1976, almost a half century ago. This clearly indicating nothing but uh, the same part of the statement which is written in the main statement. So A, going back to 1976, almost a half century ago. Look into the second option, almost going back a half century to 1976. Fine. Then there is no comma, and it is stated almost going back a half century to 1976. Okay. So third one is what? Going back to almost 1976, a half century ago. Okay. Then D said what? going back almost a half century to 1976. Then the fifth one, going back to almost a half century in 1976. So, what do you think? Which one will be the appropriate answer option that can replace to the bold letter underlined part of the main statement? Think of it. Okay. Now, let's analyze each of the options. Right. The first option said what? Means going back to 1976, almost a half century ago. So, what happened? This option repeats the original placement, isn't it? Repeats the original placement of the modifier, right? So, creating the same kind of a ambiguity, isn't it? Same kind of a ambiguity. It suggests that the IOWA GOP, uh, you can say that caucuses have been held regularly, even year since 1976, or every year since 1976, isn't it? So, have been held regularly every year since 1976. Okay. So, B said what? Now, it is stated almost going back a half century to 1976. Now, see that this option changes the placement of the what? Modifier, but introduces awkward phrasing. The adverb you can point out. Which one is the adverb? That called as a almost. Almost is the adverb. The adverb almost should modify a half century, right? Should modify half century, almost a half century to 1976, right? So, but it seems to modify whom? Going back, almost going back a half century to 1976, which is leading to a unclear and not concise expression, right? So you can say that this creates nothing but unclear, unclear, and not concise, not concise expression, right? So see, it is stated going back to almost to 1976, a half century ago. So this option creates you also known as a confusion one, right? By placing what? Almost where? Now look into it. Almost is used before 1976, a half century ago. So what does it say? Means it suggests that the year 1976 is not precise or clear. Additionally, the position of a half century ago, right? So at the end disrupts the flow of the sentence. So you can say that it is also creating disruption, right? So a half century ago at the end of it, disrupt. So the flow of the sentence. Now, if I look into the option D, what is the D option point out here? So it is stated going back almost, okay, going back almost a half century to 1976. Now, what does D point out? Now, D point out going back almost a half century to 1976 means that beginning of something to beginning of something to till today, right? In that case, from the 1976 to you can say that till today. So that is why we can say it is correctly placing the modifier next to the IOWA. So the word almost, which is an adverb, which is correctly placed before a half century to 1976. So then you can point out that it provides a clear and logical sentence structure, avoiding the issues present in the other options. Right or not? Okay. So if I consider option D would be the correct, let's look into the option E. So what does option E point out? Now, if you look into that, it is stated going back to almost a half century in 1976. So similar to option C, you can see that option C and option E seeming like similar. So this choice places almost before the year 1976, right? Almost where? Now, before the means year 1976, causing confusion, right? So, additionally, the phrase a half century in 1976, a half century in 1976 is awkward and illogical, right? So, even the uses of the word in, which is used, creating nothing but a kind of a confusion. So, here option E is wrong because the uses of almost before the half century in 1976 is creating nothing but a confusion, right? So, and awkward, awkward, and illogical, illogical. So we can consider that option D would be the most appropriate because it is stated the phrase going back almost a half century to 1976 suggests that the IOWAGOP caucuses have been held regularly every year, right? So in that case, we can find out option D would be incorrect. I hope you understood. Thank you.